Thank you, Senator, for raising this issue. Thank you, Cathaoirleach. I want to thank the Senator for raising this issue again. It gives me an opportunity to outline the position in relation to educational planning in schools on behalf of the Minister for Education. The Department of Education and Skills has recently written to both the Teachers Union of Ireland, the TUI, and the Association of Secondary Teachers Ireland, the ASTI, to reiterate to them the importance of planning for pupils with special educational needs in schools and to note that provision has been made for such planning. Under the Education Act, schools have a legal duty to provide an appropriate education to all students. So the Senator is right in saying that currently there is no statutory requirement for schools to provide a particular form of individual educational plans. However, there is a statutory obligation to provide education which is appropriate to their abilities and to their needs. This includes people with special educational needs, and obviously they need to plan to ensure that this happens. Planning is a normal part of a teacher's work, and planning tools like the student support file, they have been created as a resource to help students provide or schools provide for their students. This government has invested heavily in recent years in supporting our children with special educational needs, with €1.8 billion being spent annually. That's €1 in every 5 of the education budget, which is 20%, which is close enough to the figure which you've said in terms of needing special support within our schools. I can assure the Deputy that there is no mismanagement of funding, and the €1.8 billion is being spent very much appropriately. All mainstream schools are provided with special education teachers based on the profiled needs of their schools to provide extra teaching support for pupils who have additional learning needs in schools. There are currently almost 14,000 special education teachers in schools. This is an increase of over 37% since 2011, so in less than 8 years. This has greatly increased the number of special education teachers which have been allocated to schools throughout the country. The Department's Circular 0013 and 0014 of 2017, which set out the basis for the allocation of special education teachers to schools, note the importance of planning and educational planning. This is to ensure that children with the greatest level of need receive the greatest level of support. The circulars note that the educational planning is an essential element of a whole-school approach to meeting pupils' needs. The circulars also note that in making allocations for special education teachers to schools, provision is made within the total allocation for planning and coordinated activities. The Circular 0014/2017 for post-primary schools states that the allocation for special education teaching support being provided for schools includes provision for planning and coordination activities required to ensure that the most effective use of the special educational needs hours provided to schools for children. The extent of coordination time required to be used by the schools will of course vary depending on the number of students requiring the additional teaching support, but also the number of teachers providing this support. It is noted, however, that planning for the provision of additional teaching support for pupils in schools is an important part of the process, and that coordination and planning time for this has been acknowledged within the allocation, and so schools should therefore be resourced to carry out this planning. Support and guidance for schools on how to best carry out educational planning is available from the National Council for Special Education Support Service and from the National Educational Psychological Services. The Department advises that the majority of schools do carry out some form of educational planning for pupils with special educational needs. This is an appropriate use of the very significant levels of additional special educational teaching resources which have been provided for the schools. The ongoing provision of planning should represent a continuation of the good practice that is already occurring in many schools, or in the majority of schools across this country. And again, just to reiterate, there are no projects, there are no investment in education, whether it's in special needs, that are going to be changed, amended or reduced in the coming months or years because of any other project that is ongoing.
Thank you, Minister. Senator, supplementary.
Yeah, I thank the Minister for your response. And I just want to reassure you, Minister, that in talking about the potential downstream consequences of mismanagement, I'm not suggesting mismanagement of the existing budgetary allocation into the area of special needs in education. I'm talking about the wider mismanagement of money in the public money in the economy, and therefore the lack of perhaps necessary extra additional resourcing, because you yourself make the point that you're estimating that about 20% of the budget going for special education needs, 1.8 billion, kind of not far off the quota of students who have special education needs of one kind or another. But surely, where you're talking about children with special education needs, you would imagine that there would be a greater percentage of resources, not a slightly lesser percentage of resources dedicated to their needs. The fact remains that this area of the legislation. Why are individual education plans in the legislation if they haven't been at this point provided? I don't dispute, I'm involved in the management of a primary school myself, which is in receipt of resources under the special needs heading. I don't dispute that there has been much investment in the area, but why is the legislation there envisaging individual education plans and still 14 years on that not being implemented?
Thank you, Senator. Minister.
Well, I suppose all I can reiterate is that we look at the figures and we see that in the last 7 or 8 years we have seen an increase of over 37%, albeit while we still have probably some more work to do. I think you would agree that that is a significant increase. 14,000 special educational teachers in our school is a significant amount, providing support to students on a daily basis. 1.8 billion being spent annually, and obviously the impact that that is having, I think, is quite significant over the country. As I've said again, there is no statutory requirement to provide a particular form of individual education. However, there is a statutory obligation to provide education to students which is appropriate to their abilities and to their needs, and the Minister has already outlined that the vast majority of schools are providing those plans. They're focusing on it where there is clear measurable learning targets, specifying the resources and the interventions that will be used to address student needs, and this is in line with the continuum of support process. While subject teachers retain overall responsibility for the provision of education to their students, in most instances special education teachers will develop the student support plan. So I think teachers are working with their students, they're working with their parents and families, and they're working with their overall school to make sure that those plans are in place. The department is again informed, or is informing me that the support and resources are currently there, but obviously if the Deputy has information to the contrary, then I will pass that on to the Minister, and obviously he will continue to engage with both the TUI but also the ASTI to make sure that children receive the adequate support that they require. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you, Senator.